ibadat, or the worship aspect of our faith, but we also have the understanding of the mu'amalat, or the everyday transactions, whatever the dealings that we have within our lives. And it is something that we need to have an understanding of in everything that we do, especially when it comes to our dealings with our own affairs, when it comes to money, when it comes to business, the marketplace, and those type of things. Umar ibn Khattab actually, in one of his sayings, he said, no one should sell in our marketplace except for the one who has an understanding of the rules of Islam. And the reason why he said this is because he goes on, he says, otherwise he is going to consume riba, whether he knows it or he doesn't know. Whether he wants to consume it or he doesn't want to consume it, he's going to have that aspect of it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a risk in our livelihood. He's the one who's the provider, the sustainer, he's the one who gives us the risk. And it's important for us to be good stewards of the risk that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. And because we will be asked about this on the Day of Judgment. That we will be asked about what it is that we did with the provision that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us. So last week, we spoke about keeping a middle way between extravagance and miserliness. We mentioned an ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing the Ibadur Rahman, the servants of the most merciful. And he says one quality about them is وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا أَنْفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرِفُوا وَلَمْ يُقْتُرُوا وَكَانَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ قَوَامًا. That those who, when they spend, are neither extravagant nor are they miserly, but they carry a middle way between the two. And as we also mentioned, just as a recap for those maybe who weren't here, the middle way is different for different people. Between a rich person and a poor person, there's completely two different middle ways. Somebody, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless somebody with wealth, it's going to have a different middle path than somebody that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed with a poor person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed with will have a different middle path as well. And so there's nothing wrong with a wealthy person having expensive things. It's more a matter of it's a relative idea to be able to think about. But it is wrong for a poor person to be able to buy expensive things that they can't afford. There is something wrong with that. And the reason why, and especially if they're doing it by falling into debt, as being able to be in debt, to be able to have that extravagant lifestyle, to have extravagant things. The only reason why someone would do it, to be able to spend money that they can't afford on things that they don't really need, at a price they can't afford, is because of either covetousness or to show off. That's the only reason why you do it, to be able to have other people see you as having expensive things, showing off, or because you desire something that somebody else has that you don't want them to have but you want for yourself. Those are the two reasons why people would be able to do that. So, let's take an example, for example, of a nice car. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala maybe didn't bless somebody, a poor person, with having that nice car, but he has the means to be able to get a mediocre car. Now, why is it that person would actually go after and maybe get into debt for being able to have that expensive car? Think about that. Why would the person need it if he has a means of transportation other than that expensive car that he wants? It's either going to be because of covetousness, or it's going to be because he wants to show off and be able to pretend like there's something there that's really not. So the second rule that I want to talk about in this khutbah is in the area of not falling into debt. As a Muslim, not falling into debt. In this society, debt is something that is seen as a very, very minor thing. Right? But in Islam, it's a very, very major thing. It's basically sometimes when you can't afford something, society always tells you, oh, you can't afford something, borrow it on a credit card, get a mortgage for a house. You can't afford a car, get a 10-year loan, even though the car's only going to last you 7 years. Get a 10-year loan and you'll be able to pay everything else. So the entire system is built around having these type of things. And here, when I talk about debt in Islam being a serious matter, I'm not even talking about debt from a riba perspective. Because riba is something a whole other category in of itself. I'm only talking about even if it's something which is called a halal debt, it is something that is serious in Islam. Even something as a halal debt. Now, talking about riba, just one paragraph, I'm just going to say one thing, and then I'll leave it maybe for another time. And that is in Malaysia. And I want to be very categorically clear when I say this. In Malaysia, there is absolutely no excuse for a Muslim living in Malaysia to be able to be involved in riba. We have an entire financial system that's based on Islamic values in Malaysia. If you were in the West, you can talk about darura, necessity, or need, or something along those lines. But everything that a conventional bank can do in Malaysia, an Islamic bank can also do. So I want to be very, very clear when it says that from banking to investments to takaful, all of these different things. But that's not my topic to talk about here. What I am talking about is debt. Even without riba, in general, is something that is frowned upon, or something very, very heavy when it comes to Islam, especially if you're doing it to live an extravagant lifestyle. Especially if you're doing it to live in a way that you can't afford to do. That's not only Islamically unviable. Any decent financial planner or financial advisor will tell you that that's not even financially viable for you to be able to do that. But unfortunately, and that's something that we've been brought up with, even within the Islamic banking system, there is this encouragement of getting into debt. In fact, most of their profits come from even Muslims getting into some type of a Islamic transaction where they can't afford it, or whether it be halal debt. But I want you to keep something in mind even when that happens. And that is that just because something is halal doesn't mean it's good for you. Right? So let's take the examples of McDonald's hamburger. It's halal, but that doesn't mean it's healthy for you. In the same way, a halal debt that a bank offers you, yes, it's halal, but that doesn't mean it's healthy for you, financially speaking. So it's not only the fact that it's because it's halal, we should go out there and do it. There's many things in Islam that are halal that we should try to avoid because they're unhealthy for us to be able to do, especially, again, when we're talking about this. Now, when we're talking about debt, the word in Arabic for debt, which is dain, actually the root of it comes from two other words, which implies submission and humiliation. Those are the two things that are associated with debt. And we know, living in a fairly prosperous country as Malaysia, and not even in the US and that type of thing, we sometimes forget that a lot of times, even to this day, people are sold into slavery because of debt. If you go to places like Cambodia, in Africa, or in Myanmar, those type of things, when people fall into debt, they do, in India, they do have to sell off their children to be able to pay off those debts. That still happens to this day. So debt as an oppressive tool is still around in this modern day and age. Because, why is it submission? Because the person that is in debt is in submission to the lender and a prisoner to his obligations. Is a prisoner to his obligation. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, your companion is being detained by his debt. And that's talking about the fact that, when you are in debt, basically that's your entirely your body, your mind, your soul is entirely consumed with this idea of debt. And Aisha relates in the hadith with the Prophet ﷺ, he used to make dua in his prayer. He used to say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-ma'tham wal-maghrib. That, oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from sins and heavy debts. And so one of the companions asked the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Ya Rasulullah, how often it is that you seek refuge from debts? How often it is? You say it so many times that, oh Allah, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-ma'tham wal-maghrib. Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you from sins and heavy debts. Sins are obviously why we're going to be asking for protection. But why debts? And the Prophet ﷺ responded back, he said, when a man gets into debt, when he speaks, he tells lies. And when he makes a promise, he breaks it. So for example, when you get into debt, when you tell somebody, oh, I'm going to borrow this money from you for, 1 week. How many times is it that after 1 week you can pay that person back? Oh, but I promise you, by next week, I'm going to pay you back. I'm going to get my check in the mail, I'm going to get my salary, I'm going to get some money that's inherited to me, and I'm going to pay you back. I promise you I'm going to do that. And how many times do we end up breaking, or that person ends up breaking those promises because they fell into debt? And because of that debt situation, then you get into lies, cheating, all of these different types of things. So we need to stay away from all different types of debt within our lives. And some people like to make the distinction between having a good debt and a bad debt. Right? Good debt may be like a house or education or those type of things, and bad debt being credit cards and those type of things. But in Islam, a debt is a debt. It's not something that should be taken lightly. In fact, on the Day of Judgment, Allah's not going to ask you, oh wait, your day that you had, was it a good one or a bad one? Right? But what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do is that if you died and didn't have the means of paying it back, then on the Day of Judgment, He's going to take away from you your good deeds to be able to pay that person or that institution back for whatever debt that you actually owed. Ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, said, "Fear Allah and do not die in debt, lest it be taken from you for your good deeds when there is no dinars and no dirhams." And what is the day when there's no dinars and no dirhams? It's the Day of Judgment. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will recompense the people you borrowed from with not your dinars and dirhams, because that's not going to be worth anything on the Day of Judgment. The real value that people are going to have is in all the good deeds that they did. And slowly, if you are in debt, it's like having a bag of good deeds, and the bag has a hole in it. It's just going to keep draining out to be able to pay back those type of things. O Allah, we seek refuge in you from sins and heavy debts. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, as we talk about the second part of being a good financial steward, which is to stay very, very clear, far away from debt, I want to be very, very clear about this idea that in and of itself, debt is not haram. Debt is not haram. And most people begin to associate debt with riba and thus consider it something that's forbidden. Those are two separate matters. Riba is clearly haram. Debt is something that is done, if it's done without riba, it's not good for you, it's unhealthy for you, but it's not something that is haram. And in order to emphasize this point, the Prophet ﷺ himself was in debt. Right? In fact, in Bukhari, Jabir ibn Abdullah, he narrates, he said, I went to the Prophet in the mosque, and he ordered me to pray 2 rakat. He owed me some money, and he repaid it to me, and gave me more than what was due to me. Right? And so, this idea of being in debt is not, that's why I want to be very clear, that it's not something that's haram, but it is something that's looked upon, to look down upon, it's loathed. And the reason why, remember, the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't get into debt to buy the nicest camel that was in Medina at the time. He didn't get into debt to buy a 4-bedroom house, or to have other things, the nicest of clothes, and those type of things. When the Prophet ﷺ was getting into debt, it was because he needed food for that day. That's why he was doing it. That's a completely different situation than we find ourselves in this day and age. We're not doing it for a meal for to come in the evening. We're doing it for our 5th-bedroom house, our Ferrari instead of our, Toyota, Mercedes, or whatever. That's why we're falling into debt. And that's the clear distinction that we want to be able to make. But the being in debt has very, very serious consequences. As I mentioned earlier, the Prophet ﷺ sought protection from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the debt because it led to lying and led to cheating. Our scholars tell us, in just one paragraph away, it says, it is a disgrace and a humiliation because it preoccupies the mind and it makes one worried about paying it off, and makes one feel humiliated before the lender when meeting him, and feeling that he is doing one a favor when accepting a delay in the payment. Right? Perhaps he may promise himself that he will pay it off and then break that promise, or speak to a lender and lie to him. All of the things that I mentioned. And so what happens is that not only are you lying and breaking your promises, but because it's constantly consuming you, it breaks the chain between you and your ibadah that you're doing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It breaks that chain that when you stand in your salah and you want to be able to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ta'ala for the good that He's given you, the blessing that He's given, the khushu that you have, you end up thinking about how are you going to pay this debt back and those type of things. And so it becomes an obstruction for you when it comes to you and your worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did not pray on a person that had died with 2 dinars worth of debt. Not 20,000 ringgit of a loan. Not 200,000 ringgit for a house. 2 dinars worth of debt. And the Prophet ﷺ did pray upon that person. And then Abu Qatada, who was one of the companions, he saw this, he went and he paid off that debt. And he went back to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, Ya Rasulullah, I've paid off his debt for him. And the Prophet ﷺ responded back and he said, now his skin has become cool for him. Now his skin has become cool for him. And Ibn Hajar, in a commentary on this hadith, he says this hadith indicates how difficult of a situation debt is, of an issue that is, and that it should not be undertaken unless in cases of necessity. Unless in cases of necessity. Necessity, brothers, is a life and death situation. It is not, as I mentioned earlier in my comments, it is not a want, it is not a need, it is something that you absolutely have to be able to survive. That is what is necessity. And if you are to that point, then and only then maybe the debt would be something that is acceptable for you, but you take it on with the full intention of paying it back as soon as possible, that we're doing that. Another hadith where one of the companions relate that we were sitting with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he raised his head towards the sky, then he put his palm on his forehead. And he said, SubhanAllah, what a strict issue has been revealed to me. What a strict issue has been revealed to me. We remained silent, and because we were afraid of exactly what that was. The following morning, I asked him, I said, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, what is the strict issue that has been revealed to you? The Prophet ﷺ responded back and said, by the one in whose hand is my soul. Now, the Prophet ﷺ is making, he's swearing by Allah. Very, very serious, right? He's swearing by Allah. Now, listen to what he says. He says, if a man would be killed in battle for the sake of Allah, this man is a shaheed. Okay? That's probably, I don't know about you, that's probably a station that inshallah I'll achieve, but probably not. I'm not probably going to be fighting in a battle anytime soon. So I'm not going to achieve that station. Okay, clear? Okay, so this man is a shaheed. And then he goes on, the Prophet ﷺ said, and he's a shaheed, and he's brought back to life again, and then he is killed and brought back to life again. So now, not only is a shaheed, which is I'm never going to return, but he's like a shaheed square. He's twice over shaheed. And then he's brought back to life, as the Prophet ﷺ he's saying this, he's brought back to life, and then he's killed, and he's owed a debt. Meaning he owes somebody some money. He would not enter paradise until that debt was paid off. Right? Not shaheed, but this person was a shaheed twice over. And he will not enter paradise. What do we know about the people that are shaheed? What do we know about them? We know exactly what it says about them, about where their station is in the hereafter. But for a person who dies twice over as shaheed in a debt, he will not enter paradise until his debts are paid off for him. So, that being said, you might be asking yourself, so how is it I'm going to be, if I don't borrow any money to be able to get the things that I want, then how do I buy a house? How do I own a car? How do I, buy the things that I need to buy? That's a valid question. So the one thing you have to keep in mind is what I mentioned earlier, which is you have to live within your means. You spend what you have, the risk that Allah has given you. If you don't have it, then you don't spend it. Right? That's the lesson even of the debt, is that if you stay away from the debt, then you will only be buying things that you can afford. And when you buy the things that you can afford, you're wealthy. Because you have no worries about your financial needs. You have no worries about who you need to pay back. You have no worries about all the financial stuff. You're content. And as we mentioned, the person that is content is the one that is the most wealthy. Because he has no worries about money and those type of things. So how do you do that in this thing? How do you buy yourself a car and those type of things? One thing to say this before I go on is that most people tend to think that buying a house is something that's fard than Islam. I don't know where this concept came from, but that's what most people think. It's not, that's an obligation for you. Providing a roof for your family, yes, that's an obligation. But buying a house is not. So there's nothing wrong with renting if you can't afford to buy. There is something wrong with buying something that you have to pay back for the next 30 years of your life if you can't afford it, and then be having to constantly worry about how you're going to do it. There is something wrong with that. And so how do you begin to do those things? This is the topic, inshallah, that I will save for a next or future khutbah, which is the importance of savings in Islam. The importance of savings in Islam. And being able to be good financial stewards of the risk that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us or provided for us. We have learned already that we need to carry a middle way between extravagance and miserliness. And that we should stay away from debt, because it's something very, very serious in Islam. And it should not be taken unless in cases of necessity, even though it is permissible. And lastly, I'll close with this hadith, which inshallah will foreshadow exactly what I'll be talking about, which is the third aspect of being a good financial steward of your affairs. The Prophet ﷺ said, may Allah have mercy on a man who gained money, who earned money in a halal way, who spent it economically, and he's used some of the surplus for a day when he needed it. Right? A man, may Allah have mercy on a man who earned money in a halal way. If you are earning money and you're working for British Tobacco or Genting or something along those lines, then you have other things to worry about. You don't worry about the middle way. You have to first fix your income, because that's the first part of this. You earn your money in a halal way. Then the second part of this, you spend it economically. وَبَيْنَ ذَلِكَ قَوَامًا. In between both extravagance and miserliness, that's how you spend your money. That's the second way. And the third, which I'll talk about in more detail in a future khutbah, is that you use a surplus. You save some of it for a day that you're going to need it. Allah asks you to make us of those who are good financial stewards of our affairs. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا. اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. اللهم إنا نسألك إيمانا كاملا ويقينا صادقا وقلبا خاشعا ولسانا ذاكرا شاكرا وعملا صالحا وعلما نافعا ورزقا واسعا وتوبة نصوحا وتوبة قبل الموت وراحة عند الموت ومغفرة بعد الموت برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد